Hello, everyone, and welcome to this side event to the UN Ocean Conference. Thank you for joining us. Very much know how busy this UN Conference week is, and we really appreciate your time. My name is Francois Mosnier, and I lead the ocean research at Planet Tracker. Today, we will talk about the role food retailers can play in improving ocean health, with a focus on seafood sustainability and its links with profitability. Before that, let me tell you about Planet Tracker. We are a not-for-profit finance think tank. The work I will present was funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation through the Finance Hub. Thank you for your support. And in brief, what we do at Planet Tracker is to investigate the risks and opportunities related to environmental limits from a financial perspective. Today, we are very lucky to have two incredible speakers with us. Agathe Grossmith is head of ESR projects at Carrefour, one of the largest food retailers globally. Hi, Agathe. Thank you so much for being with us. Robert-Alexandre Poujade is Biodiversity Lead at BNP Paribas Asset Management. Hello, Robert. So thank you both for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it. And in the next 57 minutes or so, we will talk first about the rationale for this project, and then explain how we link seafood sustainability and profitability. I will take you through an interactive tool that everyone can use, and then outline the results of a case study on Carrefour. Through this case study, I have to say Carrefour has demonstrated a very high commitment to transparency, which is great. So thank you again, Agathe. Overall, this will take us about 15 minutes, and we will then have a discussion with Agathe and Robert. If you want to participate, please send your questions using the Q&A functions of the chat, please. So let's jump right in, not in these beautiful waters, but by listening to Robert-Alexandre. So Robert, since it is through our engagement with you really that this project was born, can you perhaps tell us about the context and the rationale for this work?
As BNP Paribas Asset Management is concerned, we have three areas of focus: energy transition, environmental sustainability, and equality and inclusive growth. So regarding my pillar, I would say environmental sustainability, I think marine biodiversity has been a little bit left behind, or it's kind of the blind spot in terms of data. And as you know, investors, they like data to basically make a topic mainstream. We don't need data sometimes, you know, common sense is sometimes also a good way to invest, right? But it is true that it is helpful to have data, especially to raise awareness internally. So that's, let's say, the first comment. Our first thinking with you, Francois, was, hey, how can we have more data on how companies are exposed to by marine biodiversity loss, which ultimately is bringing risk to us as investors: physical risk, transition risks, and systemic risks. So I'd like to be very vocal about this because I know this is the motto of Planet Tracker, and actually it's also our motto. We really want to consider planetary boundaries in considering risks and considering returns, which means we need to consider Earth as a system with interconnectivity between biochemical cycles, biosphere integrity, climate change, but also overfishing, I mean, typically. So this is exactly why we thought that it would be really interesting to do a deep dive on what does it mean, you know, for like crossing the marine biodiversity limit. Basically, what does it mean for Carrefour, for a retailer? And why a retailer? It's because basically, as investors, as mainstream investor, we have exposure to the seafood value chain mainly through downstream actors, so mainly through food retail, rather than the fishery itself, given how financial access to finance is being made in the seafood value chain. So we think the risk is mainly through the downstream actors, and this is why we have investigated in the past with Capitals Coalition. We did some case studies. Actually, Carrefour was included in our case study in 2018, but at that time we relied on our own methodology. It was really exploratory work, and we didn't have like 4 million data points provided by Carrefour, and we didn't have your brain, Francois, to code everything and again Latin names of fish and all that. So yeah, I think this is the context. The aim is really clear. We want to understand how Carrefour is responding to the biodiversity crisis, the marine biodiversity crisis, and as well as social considerations, because we talk about illegal fishing, we talk about human rights. Seafood has not just environmental consideration, also social considerations. So yeah, we thought it would be very useful for everybody to have more clarity on what is the current best state of the data in order to understand those risks. And we couldn't think of a better partner than you, Francois, to be honest, and of Carrefour, because we have proximity, not only in terms of common language, but also like understanding of what is at stake here. So and also aiming for I would say. So yeah, I think that was a really cool project, which was very much needed to move a little bit higher the marine biodiversity topic into investor agendas. And I might finish with TNFD, because what we do here can have a lot of ramifications. TNFD is discussing how to best integrate risk, impact, dependencies on nature. And again, if we use like a lot of the data which is out there today, we use modeling techniques, which basically are all linked to a Globio model, for example, which is targeting terrestrial and aquatic biodiversity only, not marine biodiversity. So, we are producing our impact reports, our biodiversity footprint today for our corporate investments. So marine biodiversity will not be in those reports. It's again left out of the topic. So we don't want TNFD again to go out and be, be very vocal about those risks and those impacts, but without marine biodiversity. So this is why it's a good timing, I would say, so that also all stakeholders in this kind of initiatives, TNFD, there are others initiatives, are aware that this can be done and this can be useful.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Robert. You're too kind. And just one thing that I wanted to add before moving on is that, of course, that I did not code this myself. I have a much brighter brain colleague called Filippo who did all of that. And thank you, Filippo. And let me just maybe explain why we did that from the corporate perspective, if you want, because you shared the views from the investor. And what we wanted to do really is to allow every company that buys or sells seafood to assess the environmental and financial sustainability of the seafood. And to do so, as you highlighted, we designed what we think is relatively simple methodology, replicable. That's the key, so that anyone else can use it, and based on real data as much as possible, which would also show both the risks and the rewards, because it's quite important, to highlight the reward point as well. And of course, the ultimate goal is to encourage more seafood supply chain disclosure, so that investors get more data, the ones that you said is badly needed. So how do we encourage this increased disclosure? In our view, it's by looking at it from a financial perspective. In the past, we wrote about, for instance, how the wild catch of sustainably caught fish species like Alaska pollock actually generates very high margin. So there's a clear link here. Lower down the supply chain, we've also showed how implementing traceability could increase margins at processors. And here we move further down the supply chain, as you said, to show the link between margin and sustainability at food retailers. So how can a company link seafood sustainability and profitability considerations? I think first, of course, you need to identify the data that is already available. So you can see some example here. As a company, so what sort of data do you already have, and estimate what's missing. So missing data can be found by asking suppliers or by estimating it. With all of that, then you can, of course, create and assess the sustainability of your business, looking at many indicators, and our tool will help you will show you which one to use. And then the end goal, of course, is to combine this information with the profitability of each of your seafood products. And for instance, if you find out that some of your least profitable species are also the least sustainable, well, maybe it's time to perhaps, stop selling them eventually, or at the very least address that point. Now, the question is, how do you do this in practice? How do you know which data are needed? How do you estimate the one you don't have? And then which indicators you look? So that's why we designed what we grandly call the Seafood Sustainability Protocol, which I'm going to show you just now, assuming that the tech is not defeating me. So here you go. So it's a very simple, I'll be very quick. And so will you as well if you use this tool, because there's just effectively 5 questions to answer. Well, this tells you why you should use it. First question is about the scope of seafood, the scope in terms of your seafood business. So let's say that you actually already have a list of all your seafood products and suppliers. That's good. The second question, will be about metrics. Which metrics do you know about your seafood business? Let's say I know purchase volume. That's it. And the third question, often used as a proxy for sustainability, but in our view, not enough. It's certification. So do you know whether your seafood products are certified or not? Let's say we don't. It doesn't really matter. And perhaps the most important question here is about the type of data you already have about these seafood products. So this is exactly the process we followed with Carrefour, and I'll explain later on. Let's say that you don't know whether the product was farmed or captured in the wild, looking at the product, but you know from which country it comes from. And let's say that's it. You don't know the exact species. So you don't know if it's Atlantic bluefin tuna or bluefin tuna. You just know it's bluefin tuna, for instance. Now the tool is telling me, okay, well, you need more information to be able to assess your data. The best way is, of course, to ask your suppliers. And by doing so, you start a process that will ultimately generate more seafood supply chain disclosure, which is great, and more data for investors. But as a quick fix, if you don't have, if the suppliers are not answered yet, you can estimate it. How? And I think that's quite important and interesting. Well, we will tell you how, basically. So by clicking here, hopefully it should start a window that will say, okay, I can miss the introduction page, but basically gives you a list of methods that you can basically, whereas you can estimate, you can estimate all of this information that is missing. So I'm not going to go through all of this, of course, but it's quite simple and gives you the source every time, which means that now you can then you have all the tools, if you want, to be able to assess your seafood data. I'm just entering my email here, and that's by doing so, I'm able then to access the methodology that is personalized for each company, so that they can then say, okay, so this is how, with the data that I have available, this is how I can analyze my sustainability. So if I click here, view personalized report, again, that's some words explaining what to do, and it's a very short thing, really.
and it tells you exactly what to do using which link, etc. So for wild caught species or for farm species, of course, it's going to differ. And yes, that's very much it about this guide. We encourage every company to use it, and it's going to be, we hope, very useful and very encouraging. Some companies have already used it, which is helpful. So now the question
François, can
is,
I jump in?
Yes, of course.
Yes, I mean, I have partly the answers, but how much of, if I don't have any information at all, how much of the result can be trusted or reliable? Because I guess there's lots of averages and like models behind. So can I be confident in, I mean, is it useful if I don't have information? Can I still use the tool?
Yes, so it depends what you mean by I don't have any information. So if you sell seafood, it is a hope that if your company is selling seafood, you will know the list of the seafood products you sell. That's a prerequisite. If you don't know the list of seafood products you sell, i.e. if you don't know that you sell, I don't know, cans of tuna, you don't even have to know that which type of tuna. I'm just saying, if you don't have this information, then there's not much we can do indeed. But provided that you have this information, and then the more you have, then of course, the better your estimate is. So what we think is absolutely necessary to be able to perform a robust assessment is the volumes of each product or the sales, so some metric indicator, and any form of geographical location, so where does the product come from, and the way it was harvested, so was it farmed or wild caught. But again, if you don't have this information, using this tool will tell you, okay, how do you find that? And this is something that we've been faced to in a situation where it says tuna. It could be farmed tuna, it could be wild caught. How do you know? Well, if you really have no idea, then you look at the global average or the average in the area where the product was harvested, and then you can have a statistical answer, basically. So that's very much what we did. But effectively, in a nutshell, yes, you pretty much anyone can use it. And to be able to also force you to realize at which stage of this sustainability knowledge journey you are, we provide a rating system where, you know, between 0 and 10, showing you where you are and telling you how much you could progress just by, you know, dedicating a little bit of your time to this, I think, very important topic. But maybe you will understand better through this example of Carrefour. As you hinted, Carrefour has very kindly accepted to share the procurement data for much of their seafood business in France. So let me thank you again, Agathe, for this, because this data set contains a huge amount of information. It's well, very confidential information, but more than 4 million data points about thousands and thousands of products sold over a period that ended in September 2021. It contained information such as suppliers, certification, volumes, warehouse used, price per margin, etc., etc. So really, really useful. And what we did was relatively simple in theory. One, assess the sustainability of that seafood, and two, match this information to profitability information to see whether there would be a link between the two. So on sustainability, this table summarizes our findings using indicators to assess what we call both the environmental and financial sustainability of Carrefour seafood in France. Talking about financial sustainability, of course, for confidentiality reasons, we can't display many, well, we can't display much in terms of actual financial indicators, but we used some like concentration and diversification indicators at the top of your screen, which are effectively a form of measure of financial sustainability, if you think about it. And overall, our results show that on 11 out of these 13 indicators, Carrefour in France is either performing well, that's the rows highlighted in green, or moving in a positive direction with room for progress. That's the rows highlighted in gray. And let me just give you two examples so you understand a little bit what we've done and why a row would be green or orange or gray. We estimated that the quantity of fish that is discarded at sea associated to the seafood sold by Carrefour. So how did we do that? We basically computed that for every 100 tons of wild-caught seafood sold by Carrefour in France, another 5 tons were discarded at sea. So it's not ideal, but it's a significantly lower proportion than the French or the global average. It's 18 tons in France, for instance, so which is why it would be in green. And another example would be on seafood coming from illegal, unreported, and unregulated origins. Again, we found a much lower proportion at Carrefour, with the caveat again that these are our estimates, of course. This is not data coming from Carrefour. This is good, and on this point on illegal fishing, it probably reflects the fact that Carrefour has been very active on the fight against illegal fishing. Now, one of the orange rows that you might have seen before was about the use of selective fishing gear. So we estimate that small-scale fishing gear contributes to a high proportion of the seafood purchased by Carrefour in France, which is good. That's the dark green area at the bottom of your screen here. But bottom trawling accounts for a higher proportion. That's the top right in orange, or salmon, actually. The fact that the proportion is significant is pretty much inevitable because bottom trawling generates 28% of seafood landings globally. But because it's the type of fishing gear that has a high impact on the seabed and the species that live there, we definitely think this is something on which Carrefour needs to work further. And actually, Carrefour has already stopped selling many deep sea species, which is great, and also not the case of many of its competitors. So that's very encouraging. But what we strongly believe is that Carrefour should proactively actually disclose the real proportion of seafood harvested by bottom trawlers and a plan to reduce it, in line with its commitment to offer species caught with selective fishing gear. And turning to a gray indicator, i.e. where Carrefour is going in the right direction, but progress still needs to be done, we have computed the revenue that we think come from overfished seafood population. We estimate it is between 7 and 16% of French seafood revenue, so including both farmed and wild caught. And to link sustainability and profitability, we compare the margin that we estimate Carrefour makes on wild caught seafood revenue, to the health of the fish stock. This chart shows you that on overfished species, so the one with the lowest score on the x-axis, Carrefour tends to generate, in our opinion, a lower margin than on species in good state. We're not suggesting a causal link here, and we can't publish the actual margins, but we believe this is something that Carrefour should look into. So overall, and you'll be lucky to hear this is my last slide, our analysis shows that Carrefour has room for further progress on a series of seafood-related environmental considerations. And again, this is based on the assumption that our model is correct. But the reality could be very different, and there's only one way to know, which is improved seafood supply chain disclosure. We believe Carrefour should track in a centralized way 4 indicators for each seafood product. That's the one that I've mentioned before as allowing you to perform a very robust sustainability assessment. The first one is exact species, so the scientific name, exact location of harvest. Of course, it's not always going to be available, but having it when it is important. And the detailed harvesting method. By that, I mean which farming technique or which fishing gear, because their impact varies considerably. And the date of harvesting, because there's a seasonality consideration as well that is important. And so if you have these 4 metrics, you can perform a very robust sustainability assessment. And the cherry on the cake is that, in our opinion, this increased effort might very well be profitable, as we show in this chart. So here we tried to compute what would be the net financial benefits of increased seafood supply chain disclosure for Carrefour. Of course, it would take time and there will be associated costs linked to that this process, but we estimate that even a tiny increase in the value of the Carrefour brand in France, we estimated at plus 0.1% in our model, so almost nothing, would more than offset this cost. Again, by the way, I realized I forgot to send you the spreadsheet behind this chart. I think you were keen to use it internally, but don't worry, I will send it to you. And yes, as I said, this concludes my presentation. You can find more information, of course, in the report, and we can then move on swiftly to the discussion. Just a reminder that anyone can ask questions online via the Q&A system. And in the meantime, I have a few questions for Agathe and Robert. So maybe should I start with maybe with you, Agathe? Perhaps a simple question, but I think worth reminding: why is seafood sustainability important for Carrefour?
First of all, thank you very much, Francois, for reaching out to us and for the introduction from Robert for us to be part of this experience, actually, and this study. Maybe I should first say that the mission of Carrefour is to lead food transition for all. This is the sense of purpose for our business that has been set to the company, and seafood plays a big role in this. I will just explain in a very simple way. Seafood transition for us is healthy, sustainable and accessible food for every one of our clients at an affordable price. So this is what we need to do, and seafood is part of this for many reasons, because of climate, because of biodiversity, also for social reasons, for human rights as well. It encompasses many of our sustainability issues or what is at stake in our sustainability roadmap. I would like also to say that if you go in a Carrefour store, just imagine for a second, maybe actually some of you here around the table are clients of Carrefour. If you go in a Carrefour store, you might find seafood in the can section, like tuna, mackerel, sardines, if you like them. You can also find seafood in the frozen section, and also in the fresh counters and the traditional counter, so on the shelf served by one of our employees. So there's actually many places in the store where you can find seafood. And seafood is important for us also because it's important for our clients. Just a quick question. I won't have the feedback, but just imagine. I'm pretty sure most of the people around here and connected today have canned tuna in the cupboard at home, in their kitchen, somewhere in the kitchen. I guess some of you also have frozen fish in the fridge somewhere for when it's needed. And most of us, if eating animal proteins, may have had shrimps or salmon in the last week or couple of weeks. So seafood is definitely part of the agenda of food transition for all, and this is why we have set up some sustainability targets, and we were very keen on making this study with you to actually have an external eye looking into our data sets and digging into all this to make sense and have a different vision than the one we have. And I guess we'll dig a bit more into this and how you actually brought some information that we didn't have or we didn't check in the way you did.
Thank you, Agathe. Typical mistake that I swore would not do, which is to stay on mute. Yeah, thank you. You really you highlighted this very well. I wanted to ask you the same question, Robert, but I think you already answered in a way why is seafood sustainability important for an investor. But perhaps in a more, if I was a cynical, I would say as an investor, you care about profitability. So why for you or for any other investor would it matter to focus on seafood sustainability?
Sure. Well, I think it relates a little bit to the topic of double materiality, planetary boundary sinking, and our role as investors. Of course, we do have impacts on nature. Of course, nature has impacts on returns. So we are trying to understand those relationships. There are lots of unknowns, but what we do know is that we absolutely need to shift our thinking to have more interconnectivity between the topics that we are looking at. When I say topics, it can be risk, it can be impacts. So, I might go a little bit far, but if you have just a climate change angle and if you want to minimize your emissions, well, it makes sense to stop overfishing. Remember, Francois, the studies we've seen on, it's good to keep large fish in the seas because they also have a role in carbon sequestration. I'm even not talking about whales, that have the power of the Amazon forest also. So that's just one topic. If you think about other topics, which is access to food for coastal livelihoods, 2.3 billion people are depending on fish as a primary source of proteins. That's another way to think about it. So there's a role of investors to take into account all these topics in an educated way as much as we can prior to investing. So it's a little bit difficult. So of course we have to take into account those risks, and we might have exposure to overfishing via retailers or via other of the players. So how do we tackle this? That's our responsibility. The other responsibility is to try to improve or make as good stewards a good collaboration, a good engagement with the corporates in which we invest to make them change, to transform the value chain as much as we can. So that's another responsibility. So because ultimately, it is also a question of I wouldn't say profits, but okay, maybe we can say it, but it's a question of returns. Also, it's a question of financial stability. So in the end, our clients are expecting us to make the best decisions from a return perspective, but also, of course, from a sustainability perspective. So this is why we claim ourselves the sustainable investor for a changing world. So this is basically our objective is really twofold. But coming from let's say with a very harmonized view and a very close collaboration with the team I'm part of, the Sustainability Center, and the portfolio managers, the one who are investing our clients' money via the funds that we sell. So yeah, there's really a good alignment.
Thank you. I'm glad that there is alignment. I noted a few words on alignment, interconnectivity. I think that's all music to my ears. And I just wonder, I got maybe a similar questions, but at Carrefour, how are environmental consideration, fitting versus financial targets? Are they integrated into financial targets? Are they linked to them? Are they dependent on financial targets? Or maybe, if I put it differently, how do you ensure that environmental sustainability targets and financial sustainability targets are both met?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm not sure we have the exact key solution yet, but the way we have been implementing at Carrefour is, first, if you want those targets to meet, you need to have targets. That's probably the first thing. So when we set up targets for Carrefour, we decided to have at first 50% of our Carrefour brand products coming from sustainable seafood. Now we extended these targets to also national brands in our stores. We have encompasses the target within our CSR and food transition index. I'm just going to explain what it is because it's very significant for how in our governance this index. This index aggregates all our CSR and food transition targets. It's a way for us to track on a regular basis, monthly or every trimester, the performance of the company. It's also a way to disclose it, because this is disclosed regularly, at least on an annual basis, and some indicators are even released more often. How we track regarding our targets. So for instance, if I have a target in 2025, I will report every year where I sit on for this specific year. Am I before the target or above or below? So this will give us a sense of direction. And this index is then tracked for the whole company and integrated in the remuneration of our top management, of all the employees of the group entity, of all COMEX members in countries. So it's really embedded into our governance. And then it's also tracked by our purchasing teams, especially our chief purchasing officer is actually leading a committee that is following these results very closely, and also designing rules for implementation. Because one target is good, but then you need also to have operational rules on how to really make this happen. And this is shared with our buyers everywhere in where we operate. With many tools. We have a magnificent booklet that is very long, but also we have short videos explaining for each KPIs how it works. And through this, we've been able to really aggregate the strengths of our buyers on making sure when we buy seafood, it's the right species, it's the right technique, it's maybe certified, or it's part of our Carrefour brand, which is called Carrefour Quality Line, that respects some criteria that we think are important. So this is how we make this work. I'd like just to add maybe one thing on how it can then meet the financial targets. I just mentioned that we had a commitment on our Carrefour brand product that we then extended to other brands. I think this approach is very important. It's important that we're able to apply this on every product and to kind of set up a standard. Because then we set it up for obviously Carrefour stores, but I believe it's going to go further, and it's going to be also standard for the whole sector. Because sometimes, obviously, involving our clients will be profitable. Sometimes we just need to make sure everybody is playing in the same, having a level playing field, let's say. And then the last point is indeed how we include consumers in this process. I'll just take one example, and we can come back to it. But I'll go back to this can of tuna that you all have in your cupboard. I think. I hope it's Carrefour brand. When we were challenged by NGOs on the sustainability of our canned tuna, we have been implementing a specific traceability. We made sure it was coming from fat-free fishing method, which is basically avoiding some captures of species that we don't want, like turtles or other animals. And we've been actually making this visible on the product. So the technique was pull online. We put it on the product. We made it communicate to consumer. Frankly, we had no idea how it would be received by the market, and we had a very good feedback. So sometimes it's also good to involve consumers, because then we have traction and we see that the product is actually being bought in our stores. So the more our clients choose these products over others, the more sustainable and profitable it is for us.
Thank you, Agathe. And yeah, that was very comprehensive and helpful. But I have to disappoint you and twice. Sorry. First, as I don't have any can of tuna in my cupboard, so no Carrefour brand. And also from our conversation that we had, it's and you can see it as well in the report. There is still some data that Carrefour doesn't have that would allow a better assessment of the sustainability, and that would allow perhaps also to maybe your marketing team or your consumer engagement department. I don't know exactly how it would be called, but to perhaps develop new products or new lines, new ways of making money technically, that is more connected with sustainability. So if you pause 1 second and try to identify what are the things that Carrefour doesn't have right now that the group could benefit from in terms of better connecting sustainability and the rest of the business. Is it a lack of data? Is it changing processes? Is it old IT systems, all of the above. You know, I don't know, but
I think many of what you just mentioned. I'll start with one example. Indeed, what you did in your study was to look at all our sales information as a whole. You looked at everything at the same time and assessing the whole thing. When I report globally on our sustainable seafood, I will share the proportion of what we consider as sustainable in our portfolio, in our turnover. I think you went into a lot more detail, but on the global sales data. And I think that's interesting. So basically using data crunching and data analyst, you've been adding a lot of value to the analysis that we were able to do. Because at Carrefour, our first reflex would be to check product by product. So on a product base, I can say, okay, this specific product is coming from this species, this type of method of fishing, this area, and I know if it's certified or not, for instance. And through this, I'm able to say whether it's part of our KPIs. But we never screened it like you did, crossing several KPIs. Because although this is obviously checked on a product basis, then we won't aggregate all the figures for every Latin species or for every fishing method. And then the very interesting part of your study was to match this with our commercial data. So I think we learned a lot from your study, very humbly. And our targets are so far to reach one fish out of two, so 50% of our seafood being sustainable. So we still have a lot to do, and I think what you provide to us will be very useful to set up basically our new roadmaps and for the steps. Because we also believe that in terms of seafood, we've been doing good steps, but there's something new to be invented. As you mentioned in the study, certification is a good step. We need to go further. I think it was very interesting to see the part of every fishing method in our supplies, and I think we never reported in that way. And the connection, obviously, with profitability was something we didn't do exactly in this way. So data is going to be key in the future, and the data system obviously will be needed. I think that's a good demonstration from your study, and also maybe a new thinking of the next steps of what is sustainability and how we use new fishing techniques, etc.
Thank you, Agathe. It's very helpful, and yeah, thank you also for your kind words. Robert, can I ask you very quickly, and then I've seen that there are many questions.
Yeah, there are many interesting questions. I don't know if you saw the
chat.
Yeah,
exactly. So I was about to answer them, but I can give you 1 second to think about on the specific point that Agathe just mentioned. What can investors do to help? So when Agathe just said about improving internal processes effectively, is it through your engagement? Is it through I don't know. I mean, hence my questions, basically.
No, yeah, sure. I mean, engagement is definitely I think the place to start. I think your study was very ambitious, very detailed, with a lot of area that you covered, some that you did not cover. I see a question on social consideration. If you Control F the PDF, you don't see social at all. Sorry, Francois, it's not against you. It's just you cannot do everything at the same time. But yes, there are many topics that investor could take on and engage companies on. So, for example, we've been engaging two Japanese seafood companies. There's a public case study on the UNFFI website if you want to have a look on the type of asks that we make, how we want to build the relationship, and the fact that yes, we believe in a transition because let's face it, on seafood issues, we don't have the same visibility as climate, and climate took a long time to build as as a priority topic in the investment community. So yeah, it's a step-by-step approach. There's lots of guidance to help investor start the conversation. Again, UNEP-FI, Planet Tracker, capital allocation, whatever. I mean, it's plenty of guidance is there. Definitely engagement is one point. I saw there was also a question from Garrett on, so I'm taking it right now. Maybe it's just because it is true that we were really happy that Carrefour was participating to this interesting case study. I think we are still learning about the risks, about our relationship with the retailers and how we make investment decisions. We've been learning for a long time. So it doesn't necessarily mean like after this case study, board meeting, everybody in a room and okay, what do we do with Carrefour? It's not happening like that. It's more a fil rouge of how we understand Carrefour's exposure to the risk, what is their strategy, how it's improving, how it's evolving. So it's not a binary, let's say, answer, but it's definitely, as I think Agathe was saying herself for Carrefour, you know, she's learning a lot with this kind of information, and it's the same with us. We are all learning a lot about this topic, yeah. So long story short, and I hope it's not disappointing Garrett in my answer, but we need to educate everybody internally about this kind of analysis, which can then have impacts in terms of how we invest our clients' money in Carrefour or in other companies, of course.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Of course, I have to challenge you as well on social. Indeed, we haven't looked at specifically social indicators, but first there is a strong correlation between environmental damage and social damage at a high level. I think that's been proven many times. And when you look at the indicators we used, one of them will be IUU fishing. I mean, the audience will know that any red flag on IUU fishing, and by the way, we have a tool to look at all these red flags, will also be a red flag in social considerations. There are other tools that we looked at, which will have some social considerations, and we look at who are the suppliers. That's important as well. Is it purchased from local companies or not? That doesn't necessarily mean that this is good or bad from a social perspective, but it still gives you some form of information. And lastly, to finish answering this question, one element is certification, and they both have a certification program also have a social component. While I'm at it, yes, the tool can be used for any country. You'll just need to choose using the links. Basically, you will choose in your case Brazil, for instance. And there was another question which I found interesting about, yes, will the tool be targeted towards other businesses across the supply chain or a processor or distributors? As it is, and again, it's, as you've seen, it's a very simple tool. It could be done way more sophisticated, in a way more sophisticated manner, but it could be used by any company that buys or sells seafood. So by definition, a processor or distributor could use it as well already. I would love to have a conversation into how it could be made better for specifically for processor and distributor, but it does the job already, I want to say. And the last question was about an assessment on sustainability based on marine pollution from fishing method and equipment. And I think that's not something that we have looked at so very honestly here, but our plastic team does an excellent job at looking at plastic and plastic in the ocean. So happy to put you in touch there. I'm glad that we still have time for more questions, which is great. And I wanted to go back to the point of disclosure, which we haven't really discussed. Because quite frankly, I think it might be controversial. What we're effectively saying in the report is that increased disclosure would financially benefit Carrefour. And I can see how this could be, well, I can see how certain pushback could be emitted against this position. Maybe for you, Robert, before maybe I ask the same question to Agathe, but is there any financial value for an investor in Carrefour to see this increased disclosure, or is it purely about a better, for instance, that would allow you to apply a better multiple to the company, or what's your view on that?
Maybe I can go very quickly and then Agathe. So I think we like transparency because it helps us understand, you know, from a risk opportunity perspective, where the company stands. You know, sometimes portfolio manager have a view, a relative view, so it can be Carrefour versus its peers. So it is helpful to have elements in order to then that you analyze and then to take your decision. And there are many trade-offs between, you know, many top financial returns, sustainable considerations, but then they make those trade-offs call and they invest or they don't invest. But of course, you know, transparency, it's a question of trust. So if I trust Carrefour without having the knowledge of the fishing feed of the shrimp of the one farm they have somewhere in their value chain, I mean, I can live with this as long as Carrefour is reassuring me enough on the governance, the policies, the structure, the team. Is there like Agathe's team? You know, it can be very granular, like which type of persons are in charge, and you know, the programs, the certifications, everything. So if it's credible enough, I don't need the ultimate transparency. Of course, I'd like to have it because I think we should be very we should be more opening up supply chains. Of course, it's very helpful to have third-party audits and third-party like you and others NGOs coming in, but we don't need like always full transparency. It's a question of credibility and trust.
Thank you. And yes, I get, and I see another question in the chat that I will address after that, but would you agree with the position that there could be increased financial benefits linked to disclosure? And in that case, why are you not disclosing more? And maybe could you even say which actions are you ready to take based on this report to disclose more?
Well, thanks first for making the conclusion in your report that this would be beneficial. I think it was not that obvious for us before the study, to be honest. And although we are challenged by some investors like Robert-Alexandre or some NGOs, I think we never felt more disclosure was expected by the market. You know, you mentioned in your report the Ocean Disclosure Project. I have the chance in my responsibility to overlook what we communicate in terms of extra financial reporting, non-financial reporting. We answer to CDP, you know, Carbon Disclosure Project, or it used to be named like this, for climate, for water, for forest. And it is true that it is helping. That the more question we see and the more granularity we see in the question we are asked, the more we feel there's an interest from the market. And it is true that it is an accelerator when there is a demand for those information. It's keeping the dialogue in a positive tension, let's say, on how we make progress. And I have seen the amount of information that we share, and I think Carrefour might be specific on that. We have been sharing more and more information, I would say globally, on sustainability. But it's true that on seafood, it has not been as perceivable so far. I think it's changing progressively, especially in the topic of biodiversity. So obviously we are happy. The first step was to work with you, Francois, and I think it's the first step of many to have more disclosure and more transparency. But yes, I just like to mention that when there is a strong alignment between what companies are ready to do, what clients are expecting, what the investors are requesting, and NGOs demand. There is an alignment of planet that is really, really strong for a retailer like Carrefour. And I'll give an example that you all perceived. This is the case for plastics right now, for instance. In every location that Carrefour operates in, plastic is a key topic for public authorities, investors, NGOs, and consumers. I think every consumer is concerned about this issue. It's great that we have this level of awareness, and I think we need to look for the same level of traction on seafood and more broadly on biodiversity.
Yeah, thank you, Agathe. I'm conscious of time here, and I just wanted to answer one comment in the chat to avoid any misunderstanding. We actually have used third-party independent metrics also for wild-caught seafood in our tool. We used a fish source from the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership for many reasons, but we just thought that it would be that it's a great tool. And Agathe, I know that Carrefour has now connected with their team. And to come back to the example that is mentioned about Atlantic cod, it's a very good one indeed. And according to Fish Source, yes, the worst rated stock is rated 4 out of 10, so not good, and the best is at 10. And so indeed, I absolutely agree with the point being made, but no, we have also used third-party metrics for wild-caught seafood. Yes, again, I'm conscious of time, so maybe if you had each 30 seconds, anything else that you really wanted to add, something we haven't covered yet. Otherwise, I will thank you for your time. Agathe, maybe is there anything else that you would like to add?
Maybe just another big thank you for the very serious work you did on our data set. And again, happy to have someone looking inside the machine. And my conclusion would be that, yeah, on biodiversity, we expect to be taking the same track as the track that has been happening on climate, with looking at the impact, disclosing them, and engaging in a constant dialogue on this. And I hope this is going to be the same in biodiversity, but maybe a little faster. That would be my positive note for today.
Thank you very much. Robert, anything else? Otherwise, I'd like to thank you, everyone. No, I think you're on mute, Robert.
Wow. Okay. So no, just to thanks everybody for bringing such a great case study. It was like hard work on your behalf, not on mine. So really appreciate that. And just wanted to say that it's very timely with SBTN reinforcing its program on ocean, TNFD with beta framework 0.2 being out. So, Agathe talked about alignment of planets, where if we can shorten the time between the topic seems to be important to mainstream as fast as we can, and that would be great.
Thank you very much. And sorry for the questions I did not have time to be addressed. I will be in touch separately. Thank you, everyone. And if you're in Lisbon, enjoy your weekend on the beach and have a great afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Agathe, again. And thank you, Robert. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.